Bruce Daisley, and so this session is really designed, it's split into two parts really. So the intention, if you're looking to go back to the office with loads of action points and loads of clever things written down, probably not the session for you. This is more like a moment to reflect, a filler to think about some things that are happening in society. So it's split into two parts. I'm going to talk first, so I'm Bruce Daisley from Twitter. I'm going to talk really about tone of voice and brands and how it's evolving. And then I'm going to hand over to Peter Robinson. Peter runs Pop Justice, which is a remarkable reinvention, reimagining of the world of pop music, very much in the sort of following in the footsteps of Smash Hits magazine. And it is much larger on Twitter, for example, than a lot of music titles. So just a reinvention of that tone of voice. So I'm going to talk through that, and the aim really is I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes. So firstly, I'm just going to talk about tone of voice and the notion of how tone of voice has evolved. And I think one of the things that used to happen is that there was a real clear segmentation between how people used to talk with their mates and how they used to talk at work. So, you know, if you'd sort of forgive the expression, real talk was sort of like you're with your mates, you're down the pub, you're chatting to your family. Real talk was like just the natural tone of voice that you used to have. And then there was like a completely different form of communication. There was a way that you spoke when you were trying to formalise things. And if you forgive this again, I've sort of styled this as work talk. It's not always in a work environment. So it could be you chatting to your girlfriend's parents and work voice comes on, work tone of voice, the official sort of sounding element of that. A good way to check it, does anyone's mum have a phone voice? No, I said it to someone at work, yeah. I said it to someone at work, and she said, my mum's got a landline voice. I like that, the sort of the element that... And we all used to have work voice, real voice, work voice, real voice. It wasn't necessarily a massive issue. It wasn't because there was no intersection of those two things. So you'd send an email, or you'd send a letter or a memo in a work environment, and it could be formal, and then you'd be back with your mates, and that would be the real you. The only issue is that, so I'll give you some examples, all right? So some examples, is this work talk or real talk? Do not hesitate to get back to me. Right, no one in their right mind would say that, would you? It's work talk. Here's another one, give me a bell. Right, okay, real talk. Another one, at your earliest convenience. It just sounds like the most ridiculously cumbersome language, work talk. Wasn't necessarily an issue because anyone who communicated on a one-to-many basis normally went through training. So if you're a copywriter for a brand, if you're a journalist, you were told how to adapt to bring a real tone of voice to what you were saying. The challenge is, over the last few years, that's been completely exploded. And one-to-many communication is available to loads of people, principally, and not exclusively, but principally through social media. So you have a situation where the intersection of real talk and work talk now is more evident than ever before. There's sort of the clashing of those two things. And that's why tone of voice, getting tone of voice right, is really important. I'll just give you an illustration of this. So a few brands here who maybe don't communicate in the most effective way. Is anyone from 7up here? So there's an interesting thing here. I was looking at 7up's, I shan't sort of discriminate between Twitter or Facebook, but this is one of their social streams. Now, I would have thought, I haven't seen a brief for 7up, but I would have thought 7up probably targeting young people, so 16 to 24-year-olds. So I suspect the brief would be something like, live life to the full, get the most out now, rules mean nothing to us, maybe something about pop music. I find it fascinating, therefore, that the people responsible for the 7up social account seem to be channeling the spirit of a sheepdog farmer. Let me see. They basically just send out these just like strange, banal witterings. Here's one of them. That'll do, rain, that'll do. Yeah, here's another one. Welcome, summer, not a moment too soon, old friend. For me, this doesn't really embody what I'd expect this brand to be. And it might be deliberate sort of counter-invention of that. What's this? More summer. Bring it on. What I found interesting about the 7up stream is that if you take a look at it, obviously someone at some point has said, oh, right, we've got that social media thing. Make sure we're getting some return on investment on that. It's all about the ROI now. So in the midst of this stream of sort of old man's ramblings, you find we have an advertising campaign starting next week. Details to come. Just like a memo, a reminder that there's something coming. No, I don't think I'm being too unfair to 7-Up, but sort of poking fun at that. The way I look at that is it's such a misjudgment of the separation between communication, message transmitted, message received. Sort of my view on it is if that was someone whittering to my nan in a daycare centre, she'd probably get up and move to another seat. Just seems like a real counterpoint to what you'd expect. Another example here. If you find a successful formula, Wall's approach is keep doing it. So let's have a look at this. Hit like if a sausage bap would hit the spot this morning. Hit like, oh, there's a new one. Hit like if hash browns are a must for full English. Hit like if beans are a must-have. Just the same thing repeated every day. If you can imagine that someone who'd been trained was putting out things like that, you'd be really astonished. But brands do it all the time. Here's another example. There was, I know for most right-meaning individuals and people with any sense of decency find the idea of guitar solos abhorrent. But I heard this quotation the other day that I thought I could even forgive the person who did it. Robert Cray, who apparently is a man who people who like guitar solos think he does really nice guitar solos, made a quotation, which was, he was asked about his guitar solos, and he said, here's what I do. I think of the first thing that comes into my head and don't play it. And I think that's a nice thing about inspirational conversation or anything creative. Take the first thing that comes into my head and don't do it. That doesn't apply to the approach of Volvo cars and McCain on Valentine's Day. So here you go. Roses are red, Volvo is blue, the all-new V40, which one is you? And McCain posted, roses are red, violets are blue, you are so lovely, chips are too. If someone wrote that on a post-it note on your desk, I think you'd throw it in the bin. But the whole approach seems to be just publish anything, just get anything out there. The final one I'll end on is we often look in utter disgust at advertising from the 1940s and 50s, at like the simple way that they do things. This is a campaign for Bisto that just seems to have some sort of vaguely stock photography image of a mum chopping things, and it asks what memories people have got from their mum. It just seems like extraordinary that a brand would believe that this connection would actually work. And so here's the thing. So that notion of real, authentic talk that happens is being punctuated. So someone's looking on their phone, they're receiving social media updates. Their real talk environment is being punctuated. That's something that feels clumsy, inauthentic, doesn't seem to come from a human being. And obviously, clearly, most brands a lot of brands are suffering from that confusion of getting those things wrong. You don't need to be a genius to work out that tone of voice has completely evolved. Fascinating thing that came out of the Leveson inquiry last year was a look at David Cameron's texts. And you might have seen that David Cameron was, through his text messages, it wouldn't be a surprise if someone receiving a text message saying Rebecca Brooks had been arrested replies lol. But he replied lol, thinking it meant lots of love. So it was a big problem that David Cameron, it was widely published, but he was trying to adapt to a more informal tone of language. What I was particularly interested about this was the way that David Cameron's text speak became a thing. So here's another one. WTF, where's the footman? IMHO, is my horse outside? Just a nice reimagining of how David Cameron might speak in a familiar tone. Here's another one. When I was growing up, the way that politics spoke and the way that politicians spoke was so forced, so cumbersome. It just seems like a different language. Really interesting to see this tweet from the Labour Party just at the end of last year. Send out a search party. Lib Dem press haven't tweeted since July the 13th. Lib Dems replied, sorry, we've been busy running the country. #coalitious. I think Lib Dems have suffered enough. And the idea that in their name, that people are using the #coalitious is probably the final insult. Where was coalitious in the manifesto, Clegg? No one promised that. The reply from them, yes, that's going well. Keep up the good work. Just bringing a human tone to conversation. One of the fascinating ways that I think you can see how this has evolved is the process of news management and news training. one of the, it's been sort of long established that pop stars have, and footballers have so much media training, so much preparation for the world of being widely interviewed, that normally all the interesting stuff is completely sucked out of them. But that's not necessarily the case for Rihanna. I don't know if anyone follows Rihanna on social media, but I think the way you'd look at this, a psychologist would say that she's pretty close to the unadapted self. There's no sense with Rihanna that she's trying to adapt herself to win you over. Here's a tweet to her. She often replies to people who tweet her. She's very connected to these things. Rihanna, do you know your boobs are hanging out in like all your videos, right? Just checking. She replies, you're welcome. There you go. There's another one here. This is from Fish E. Pooms. Only females who are deprived of talent need to sell their art with sex and soft porn. Right, Rihanna? She replies, whatever you say, Fishy Poom Poom. That was quite heavily retweeted. Drew Prosser tweets, wow, as I look through Rihanna's timeline, I realise how classy she actually is. I see a lot of C words and F words. Not cool, not attractive. She replies, F words, you C word. Hashtag unclassy navy. So just the sense that media training is actually something that a pop star like Rihanna has abandoned. I'm going to give you an example now. And often there's a strong learning that happens that when brands realise that certainly communicating in an authentic way is a lesson that you can learn very quickly. So this is a case study here. Hold with it till the end because it has a sort of resolution to it. But Waitrose did something which was an interesting approach and probably not something that many people would advise. My dad, I went to see my dad 2 weeks ago. My dad is still astonished that people in London don't talk to each other on the tube. And I explained to him that the reason why they don't talk to each other on the tube is London is full of fucking nutters. And so no one wants to... But the nutters that are on the tube are nothing compared to the dark underbelly of the internet when you lift it up. And certainly open questions like, finish the sentence, I shop at Waitrose because are the questions that you do not want to open to the internet. As it stands, they got off pretty lightly. So they asked this open question, hashtag Waitrose reasons, and it was sort of kind-hearted. And there were some nice responses. Here's one response here from this chap, Richie ZM. I shop at Waitrose because the staff are more friendly and helpful than in Sainsbury's. That's nice. Pretty much this one's the same thing, said in a much more lyrical way. I shop at Waitrose because even the security guards kiss you on both cheeks when you enter, darling. Quite sweet from those people. Here's the next one. I shop at Waitrose because I was once in the Holloway Road branch and I heard a dad say, put the papaya down, Orlando. This was my favourite here. I shop at Waitrose because I once heard a 6-year-old boy in the shop say, Daddy, does Lego have a T at the end like Merlot? The interesting thing is that clearly the subversive response to what Waitrose tweeted was obviously something they hadn't anticipated. But the lesson of 1,000 years that took place in that day for them had sort of a good ending because they suddenly realised that most of these things were actually expressions of fondness. And they were expressions of the fact that Waitrose was more refined and was higher quality than others. And they started tweeting them out. So they started retweeted, they started sharing them, really recognising that probably the approach they'd done at the start of the day had been a bit too cumbersome, a bit really lacking in awareness of how these things work. But by the end, they'd recognised that actually they'd gone through a good experience and there was a good resolution to it. I'll talk through this because I guess to some extent what a brand might start thinking is the only thing that works on social media to just be wacky. And there's a website called Wackaging, actually, that looks at how post-innocent smoothies, how hundreds of brands started repositioning themselves, packaging themselves just as wacky brands. But I don't think that's the only tone of voice that can work in an internet environment. And so we looked at this and created this. We saw a great piece of work by a group of artists called Helicar and Lewis. And they have this triangle. They have a triangle which, when anyone commissions any work from them, the options for them are work can be good, fast, or cheap. And they invite people to choose two. And so we adapted this to really think about how brands can think about their social tone of voice. And yeah, being funny is one of the options for a brand. But it's not the only option. There was a great piece of work by Carnegie Mellon University in 2008 called Who Gives a Tweet? And it was an exploration of all the tweets that people see and what people find interesting, what don't they find interesting. The digest of it's about 4 pages. And the thing they looked at is they looked at all of the tweets that people valued. Of the ones they valued, 48% of them were informational. So they had info in them. So down there. Only 24% of them were funny. So it's not the only way to use social media to try and be funny. In fact, you can bring far more to it. So for example, choosing whether to be fun, helpful, information. Samsung very much dwell on the information. So here's some examples of Samsung. They launched a new product last week, new Samsung Galaxy 4, and all of their communication about the Galaxy 4 is focused on information. So this one here showing the live stream of it. This one here showing the Samsung Galaxy Note. There's no wackiness, there's no attempt to be funny, there's no attempt to be irreverent. They just try and provide information. Let's look at Innocent. So Innocent really tread the line between fun and being information. So they try and balance the two. So you get some things that are very overtly just trying to share product information. Very simple tweet from Innocent here, just telling you a price promotion that's taking place in Sainsbury's. Very simple, nice imagery, but very focused on information. Flip side is they also tweet out a lot of things, and they're fantastic on Facebook too. They tweet out a lot of things. This is the on-off switch that they tweet out, and just so their timeline attempts to strike a balance between the two. It keeps that sense of innocent that you have, that sense of fun that comes through their packaging, but also tries to communicate in an information way. So effectively choosing that choice is really important. And I guess that's one of the things that we saw from the Next brand. The Next brand set about trying to really be simultaneously fun and have a human tone of voice, but provide help. So O2 are absolutely formidable on all social media. They're incredible on Twitter. And I guess one of the things that we were really intrigued by is they had a couple of network outages last year. So they had a couple of major crises that they had to deal with. And they actually said through adversity, that was one of the best ways to test that the systems they'd put in place. So O2 had 2 situations where their network went down for 24 hours. So if you're on O2 network, all of your emails, your text messages, your phone calls, everything stopped for 24 hours. You suddenly realise how we've migrated to a world that everything's tentative. I'm going to meet you vaguely near Angel Station at about 8 o'clock. Suddenly doesn't have much cachet to it when you're trying to find someone in and around that area. As a result of that, O2 got quite a lot of tweets directed to them with Class A swear words in. And so I'll sort of give you an illustration of this. This is Ashley Roberts. O2 have said sorry, nice. So when I don't pay my bill for another month, will sorry do? How about something, your mother's, you somethings? They replied, she said no thanks. Here's one here from Graham Cummings. I don't think Graham Cummings sounds like that nice a guy. When it comes to Graham Cummings, I would not want to spend an evening hanging around with Graham Cummings. Just things go wrong on your night out with Graham. I think he's going to take exception to it. But Graham says, something you, suck something in hell. They replied, maybe later, got tweets to send right now. Sort of nice response. The one person you want watching your back is Bent Welly. Miss Gray. When things are going wrong in life, I really hope when some sort of scandal happens, some prickly email that I've sent gets exposed and I end up losing my job, I want Bent Welly on my side defending the subsequent Daisley-gate that happens. And Bent Welly tweets, whoever's running the O2 Twitter feed today is handling the abuse really well. Go you. Little smiley face as well. And O2 replied, I need a hug. Here's another one. So they got a whole load of people tweeting them because they were exhibiting such a tone of voice. This is a nice one. Hey, I just met you, and this is crazy. I'm on O2, so fax me maybe. Winner so far. But here's the impact of that. So one of those things that goes wrong with a brand, normally that has an impact for years. So when something like, if you remember when the Sony PlayStation network went down, when Perrier water got contaminated with benzene, all of those things have impacts on brands for years. But here's what happened in this situation. That human tone of voice, that ability to converse with people, actually had a positive impact. So this is what Wired magazine published, and they looked at different sentiments, again expressed on Twitter, but different sentiments for the brand exhibited over time. So you can see here that, yes, through the network outage, there was a massive surge in people feeling sad or people feeling angry. But the biggest increase was the love to the brand. When you speak in a human tone of voice, it has an incredible effect. There's someone in my office who recently tweeted to a restaurant, and the chef of the restaurant replied to her. And even though it's a small restaurant that can seat about 30 people, that moment of feeling like you've been connected with a brand and connected with just something that you have affection for has an amazing impact. I'll show you this final one here. You may have seen this one before. This is a gentleman, Tundi. He tweeted to O2, "Bastard big man Ting, I swear, direct me to your owner. What happened to my internet connection, fam? Man's having to use Wi-Fi and that." And I get the vibe from that his internet's not working. But he replied to that, O2 replied to that, "Have you tried to reset the router, Ting, fam, so man can use the Wi-Fi and that?" And so their objective, back to that triangle, their objective is wherever possible, yes, to have fun and to communicate in a human way, but actually you can really see it there. When the tweets aren't abusive, when the tweets appear to have a sense of need that needs fulfilling, their objective is to extinguish that need with help, so to intervene and try and play a part in that. So, look, you know, the thing that's happened over the last few years is there's been a real change in our ability to communicate one-to-many. The consequence of that is that sometimes we, or brands, can try and communicate in a way that feels forced, awkward, unnatural. What we're really starting to see is that, look, it's not a choice that you have to be exclusively wacky. You don't exclusively have to channel this sort of fun that a brand like Innocent Smoothie has. There is a choice, and the choice for brands should, first and foremost, be thinking about fun, help, information, but also trying to do it in a human way that connects with people. I'm going to now hand over to Peter. So Peter's going to talk about his tone of voice from the perspective of being a massively successful blogger. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. I'm not quite as good a presenter as Bruce there, but on the plus side, I do have a slide coming up which features a picture of a fig roll. So there's that to look forward to. Let me know when you see it. If I was to ask you to name something that works best when you don't really know it's there, you'd probably say either police surveillance or incontinence underwear. There's plenty of that being discussed elsewhere on the programme at the moment, so I'm going to concentrate on tone of voice. It's this thing which is around us so much at the moment that we sometimes don't even notice that it's really there. I'm going to go back to Bruce's discussion, actually, with this. This is the sledgehammer approach to tone of voice. Trumpet there. They think this is funny. I find that really annoying. But they think it's all right. And loads of people really like instant smoothies for that reason. However, tone of voice isn't always going to work. If there's one thing that we know about food from the last few months is that you don't joke about what is likely to be in sausages. This is tone of voice that you're never, ever going to see. Sometimes tone of voice is something which is at its most acute when you know that, for example, a newspaper has got exactly the same facts at its disposal and yet treats it in quite a different way. So this is how The Sun reported on the winner of Pope Idol. That makes sense because we know how this all works. This, on the other hand, just looks really weird in exactly the same way that if The Sun had run the Telegraph's headline, that would have looked very odd as well. Tone of voice isn't always just about words. It can be about colours, it can be about shapes, and it can be about sounds. This is something that we all understand. This is Doctor Who. There's Richard Branson. He's always in his stuff. It always works. This, on the other hand, doesn't work. We know what we know about Sky. We know what we know about Rupert. We know it isn't going to work. And I know there's a bit of awkwardness in the room. This is turning us all on a bit. If I can just ask you, if you would, if I could just ask you if you would, to control your libidos until I finished, that would be absolutely fantastic. That's been quite a broad example. I'm going to talk about pop music for most of this because pop music is the best thing ever. The best pop magazine ever was Smash Hits. Now, depending on what age you are and what era you grew up in, like some of you probably don't even remember Smash Hits as a decent thing. But it went through various different stages. It started off as a kind of like post-punk magazine. It was quite serious, actually, to start off with. And in the 80s, it kind of shifted with the tone of pop music. So toward the end of the 80s, it became something that reflected the kind of light-hearted tone of Stock Aitken and Waterman. Then in the 90s, when the Spice Girls came along, I think the average age of a smash hits reader dropped below 10 for the first time just because of the Spice Girls. And it became something that was a bit kind of less driven on humour, and then after about sort of 2001, it became something that it kind of lost its way, really. All the humour had really kind of gone from it. It was struggling to find out what its own tone should be. But this here, which I brought, is the first issue of Smash Hits that I ever bought. This was from the amusing era. This isn't the actual copy that I bought. My dad threw that away. He was the sort of person who would throw umbrellas away in the summer because they weren't being used. So Smash Hits was one of the unfortunate casualties of all that. But when first I read it, it blew my mind, actually, because this was the point when I was about 11 and I was being told by adults not to use that tone and that I had to be quite kind of serious, like on my schoolwork and stuff. And here was a magazine being run by adults who were having loads and loads of fun with pop music. Here's something that they did about Rick Astley. They interviewed him, and it turned out the first song he'd ever written was called Ruddy Big Pig. And it says a lot about the tone that Smash Hits had at that point, that they'd realised that this was the detail they wanted to pull out and then run again in the next issue. But it wasn't just the fact that they'd done that. All the way through it, there's kind of these little bits. They refer to Rick Astley as a golden-throated singer. They talk about Ruddy Big Pig as already being legendary. There's these amazing quote marks around creative and around effort, because they know that this competition that they're about to set their readers is going to have some pretty rubbish stuff. The prize of this is a Faber book of modern verse. They're obviously talking, you know, this is the magazine that was mainly being bought by teenagers, but they were talking to a far wider kind of age group than that. And that's just a small kind of throwaway competition that they did. On the letters page, you get the £10 record token if you got your letter printed, but you'd also get a commemorative pendant, i.e. a badge. You'd also get a black type tea towel. Now, the 80s were a more innocent time, but even in the 80s, tea towels weren't a particularly fashionable thing. It wasn't cool, but it was staffed by writers who were passionate about music, and they were obviously passionate, like most writers are, about getting their rent paid, but they're also passionate about writing and being able to communicate with people, being able to find people who kind of get it. And well, I guess the main thing with this is that lots of people, you know, yeah, I think a lot of people kind of looked at the tea towel thing and would have thought, a tea towel, what am I going to do with the tea towel? But this was at the point where Smash Hits was selling 1 million copies every issue. And I think people who got it really got it and were fans for life, as I was. They would even go to the point where you'd have to submit a competition entry in the form of drawing a duck, and they go for the untouchables as well. So this is Michael Jackson at the height of his powers. This is them talking about him and his Pepsi deal. The greatest mover, probably, in the history of pop. Picture caption there, Michael Jackson jiggling about. Obviously, it's great cliche that most music journalists are frustrated musicians. I actually can't think of anything worse than trying to get my job done with someone, basically me, heckling from the sideline with their helpful tips. But one of the people who worked at Smash Hits in that era was Neil Tennant. Now, Neil Tennant had started off as he worked at Marvel and the comics, and they'd get all the kind of American comics in, and then he would change the Americanisms so that they'd be English or, you know, good for this market. He went on, you know, that kind of tone of voice that he established there. He went on through Smash Hits, and then obviously ended up on the cover of Smash Hits. And that's a tone of voice that kind of carried through into Pet Shop Boys' iconography as well. There's so much about this image. I mean, it's quite a classic kind of album cover now, but there's loads about the image. There's like the kind of wonky bow tie. There's the punctuation. It's not a quote mark this time, but it's a comma. It's a small A. They wanted the album title to be part of a sentence. And it was really important to Neil Tennant that the attention to detail was there with every single aspect of it. They've always had this thing that their song title, and the Pet Shop Boys, their song titles should be written like a sentence, so it'd be capitalised at the start, and then all the subsequent words would be lowercase. That's one of their things. Well, fast forward a decade or so ago, and you've got another pop duo, both, you know, two blokes from the north of England again. This is Hertz. They have a brilliantly defined tone. I first came across them when they were in a slightly different band. They were the key members in this band. They were sort of like gothy, and it didn't quite work, and no one could figure out what they were supposed to be. So they split that up. They started Hertz, and they defined what their tone was going to be from the word Ghost. They spent 20 quid on a cheapo video. They were they were almost motionless in it, but there was this weird girl dancing behind them, and it wasn't funny, but there was a slight kind of tongue-in-cheek element to it. And they carried this through the whole album campaign. So when their where is it? When their album came out, part of their contract was that when they signed their record label, they wanted they had a clause inserted so that they would get 2 tickets to Eurovision and a comb. because they've got quite good hair, which a comb lends itself to. And to journalists, they sent out this quite nice faux leather box. It contained the CD and some sheet music. It also contained a comb, and this is the sort of thing that journalists ended up then writing about, and it communicated what they were trying to get across, that the music could be perceived as being quite serious, but there was a bit of a knowing look to it. By the time their second album was coming out, like about a month or two before it was supposed to be coming out, I got this in the post, a cassette player with nothing attached to it. It was just a cassette player in the post. A couple of weeks later, I received from Russia a letter in which is handwritten. This is from, I was quite worried when I started off reading it. It's from basically some ex-sweetheart who was like, "You left your jacket at my place. I've taken it to the dry cleaners." And there was a dry cleaning ticket from around the corner from my office in with a letter. Went to the dry cleaning place, and there was a jacket in there with a Hertz logo on it. And in its pocket was a cassette. And inside the cassette box was also, and obviously on the cassette was a load of gibberish, like Russian kind of radio frequencies and stuff. Then there's a ticket to a live show that they were doing at Heaven. Turned up at the live show, and this woman who had written me the letter met me at the door, took me upstairs, gave me some booze, took me into a darkened room where there were 12 monks in a circle chanting, and I ended up on my knees with them telling me that my name was Dave. And then I went to the gig, and that's the sort of thing which, obviously, they knew I was going to blog about this at every step of the journey. And the fans and obviously the people who read Pop Justice were really getting into it, and it's about kind of bringing personality to life in the real world, I suppose. And I don't mind telling you, I was pretty much shitting it when I was on my knee. It was really weird, but I won't go into any more detail with that. No, we're never going to know how Smash Hits would have approached Hertz, unfortunately, because Smash Hits shut about 3 years before Hertz came along. This is what Smash Hits ended up like. The tone had sort of, they were trying to do tone with it, so you might notice a couple of speech bubbles. In fact, how many are there? 1, 2, 3, thought bubble, 4, 5, 6 different speech bubbles. There's exclamation marks. They're like, punctuation still exists as a thing, but it's basically a children's magazine, is what it had turned into. You wouldn't get a tea towel with this version of Smash Hits. They would be too scared that people might think it was a little bit silly. Around that time, I started up Pop Justice, which I wanted to, I kind of wanted it to have like the golden age of Smash Hits, or my particular golden age, kind of built into it. To say that Pop Justice is indebted to Smash Hits is probably a little bit of an understatement. But I wanted it to be something which would be able to kind of divide between good pop and bad pop. There'd still be villains and there'd still be heroes and that kind of thing. And when I started it off, it was a point when, it started off in 2000, so kind of print journalists weren't really getting into the internet that much. But it seemed to me that all those kind of bits that you see in a feature when you read like a magazine article or something like that, you'll have sort of sidebars and box outs and little facts boxes and things like that. And these were the things that really lended themselves to blogging, and these kind of little, really kind of bitty things that you could do. So Pop Justice sort of took off, and it was me running it by myself for a long time. And the tone of voice that Pop Justice had, it kind of, it came really naturally to me because it was how I wanted to write. But it was only when other people started writing with me on it that I realised how complex and how convoluted, and how actually sometimes what I was trying to do that just didn't make any sense to anybody. People who were starting to write for it were saying it's almost like stepping into another character, in the same way that now, like, I know people who work in social media pretending to be pop stars on Twitter, and they have to kind of flip between these different characters here and there, depending on which tweet they're sending. So as an example of some of the tone that we try and get into Pop Justice, you know how, like, when you read in the Mirror or something, it will refer to Robbie Williams and they'll say, "Angels hitmaker Robbie Williams." Well, we have this running gag which amuses me, if nobody else, that instead of picking someone's biggest hit, you'll go for their biggest flop or their most notorious disasters. So instead of Angels hitmaker Robbie Williams, you'll have Rude Box Maestro Robbie Williams or something like that. Another example is Danny O'Donoghue, who is the singer in a band called The Script. And when BBC were launching The Voice a couple of years ago, they announced that he was going to be one of these judges, and everyone was like, "Who is this? What is he doing there?" So we had to develop a way of always referring to Danny in a certain way. And these are the options that we came up with. We basically wanted like yet another running gag. We went through all these options, and in the end we decided that it was going to be the singer from The Script. We weren't even going to mention his name. Obviously there's nothing unfunnier than someone trying to explain why something is funny. But we sort of like the fact that his identity was so nothingy, and he meant so little that he was completely absorbed by the fact that he was just a singer in the script. Yeah, poor Danny. And it was also, it kind of almost felt like it was like an anti-nickname that we couldn't even, he was so insignificant that we couldn't be bothered coming up with a nickname. Here that is in the wild. We don't even cap up singer and from. It just happens, it's quite conversational, so it's just like, it's just a singer from the script. Other bits of tone you'll notice in this catastrophic design of a website. Up in news, top left, the inverted commas are back. It's stolen completely from smash hits, make no moans about that. Because it's not really news, it's just about pop music, isn't it? It's not, I'm not going to drop something about Syria in there or something. So it's always just like news. Not proper news is how we look at it. You'll also notice that the headline is quite conversational. This is really bad for SEO. This is what people tell you not to do. This to be honest thing, like who's going to go into Google and look for something to be honest? But I kind of made the decision that Pop Justice should just about value having tone over over being usable, really. But it seems it's kind of struck me over the last 10 years that more and more journalism is kind of homogenizing, and it's all becoming one thing. And it's because people are writing headlines, writing puns, things like that, and they're doing it so that robots can find them on Google. And we wanted to have a website which worked for humans. And I think if I'd kind of gone down the SEO route and tried to just make the perfectly formed headline that people would find on Google, there would be 20 other websites that were doing that. So the relatively small audience that Pop Justice has in comparison with something like Digital Spy, I'd rather have that smaller audience than a bigger audience of people who don't really have much of an attachment to it. This is the page not found page on Pop Justice. That little face there is Paige Richardson from The X Factor, which, like, if you just come in on Google and you're looking for something and the site's not working, you're not going to know what's happening here. But I don't really mind about those people. What I want is the regular readers who are looking for something, and they'll see, oh yes, that's page not found. That's extremely funny, and then they'll go about their business. But this is the detail that makes it worth it. This is kind of like my tea towel moment, I suppose, on Pop Justice. It's not going to work for everybody. Like, you don't want to be going on the NHS website after you've just kind of gashed your arm open, and then there's kind of some lol-fueled research result findings. In the same way that if you go on the Virgin website because your broadband's not working, this is not the time for Richard Branson dressed as a bumblebee to pop up and tell you a joke or something. Sometimes you just want answers. Figure rolls are coming. Here we go. This is a story, it hurts as well, actually. This is a story that it was basically being reported, the exact same story about how Hertz recorded their album. Like, sort of 10 or 20 different websites have come up with the same story. But I like the detail in it, that during the course of it, Adam ate 4 boxes of fig rolls. And I thought, that's the kind of thing I want to know about. Everyone knows how this album's come together, and then also the album isn't very good, which is a bit awkward after all of that promotional stuff. But I like the fig roll thing. I think fig rolls is kind of where it's at with that. Twitter came along. I wasn't, like most people, I think, I wasn't really that into Twitter to start with. I couldn't figure out what the point was. I think most people have that kind of, that sort of 10 days to 2 weeks thing at the start of Twitter, and they're like, I don't understand this is chaos. And then it suddenly starts to make sense. It started to make sense for me because I realised that it was yet another way to be able to refine the voice of Pop Justice and to make it make sense in a different way. And it came along at a particular point when everyone was moving into video, moving into audio and stuff, and it struck me as really interesting that this was going back to just words. It was just words on a page. It was going back to delivering a sharp or funny or true or interesting message in a very confined environment. It was almost like going back to the picture captions. It was, it was all about the detail rather than just looking at the big picture. And in a sense, it turned everybody into a copywriter. It was like, how can we kind of deliver this message in an extremely small, extremely kind of brief way? And all over Twitter, as Bruce mentioned, there are people who are defining their personalities in ways you wouldn't know. So there's this, there's a flower company called Arena Flowers who've got a really funny Twitter. It's less funny on like Mother's Day when they're just sending out loads of apology tweets to people going, sorry, it didn't arrive. But for the rest of the time, it kind of, I think I'd be more likely to use Arena than Into the Flora, just because it kind of feels like I kind of know them a bit better. And you've got a singer like Alison Moyet, for example, who joined Twitter about a year ago and has just turned out to be extremely funny, swears a lot. This is basically humour and swearing, usually go hand in hand. But this is the sort of thing you wouldn't know if Twitter wasn't there. This is the tone of voice that people have established for themselves, which reveals quite a lot. So that's the tone of Pop Justice Twitter. There's another guy who works at Pop Justice. When I say guy, this is him. This is Dumper, the work experience robot. He doesn't realise he's a robot. He has trouble tweeting because he has to, as you can see from his hands, he has to sellotape little bits of sausage to his hands in order to be able to tweet from his iPhone, in order to get the screen to work. His is a life that has quite a strong tone to it in itself. It's kind of full of perpetual disappointment, can't quite kind of get the keys to work properly. There is the occasional ray of sunshine for him, but it usually kind of ends up going wrong. And the thing with Dumper is that I've put a lot of work into developing Dumper as a writer, so that one day he can go off and maybe get an internship somewhere rather than just work experience, go off, maybe start his own blog or something. But I think the time that I've invested in helping him as a writer is something that, even though there's no sort of material benefit to Pop Justice, it's helped to kind of create the tone. There's a robot who works there. There's a third account as well. This is a problem for me. It's the Peter Robinson account. I don't know what to do with it. I kind of feel like, oh, I've thrown all of my tone into Pop Justice and maybe into Dumper and coaching Dumper as well, that I don't really know what to do with the Peter Robinson account. I try and make a joke on Peter Robinson, but it's always a bit clumsy and a bit shit, and it looks like the sort of joke that people try to make because they're trying to be funny. And obviously the best jokes are things that aren't meant to be funny, or at least seem as if they're not meant to be funny. I think if I was doing this from the Pop Justice account, it could have been funny. I think there's a joke in there somewhere, but, well, it's not there, let's be honest. So this existential woe brings me pretty much to the end. So the point is that tone is about a collision of style and substance. It's about, like, when I talk to Hertz about why they were doing all this box and these suits and things, they kind of go, well, if you can't have a bit of fun with what you're doing, then what's the point? It's about the fig rolls, but mostly it's about the tea towel moment. And the tea towel kind of seems like a really frivolous thing, and it's not very easy to explain to somebody who's in charge of the budget, I want to print up 100 tea towels. But if you hit the right people with that right bit of tone and with that right message, then they're going to remember it like I remember the details, 20 or 30 years into the future. And if I can leave you with one bit of advice, if you don't have tea towels and you're still stuck, just throw some inverted commas around it and you're sorted. Thank you very much.